We just finished talking about Capture One sessions versus catalogs, and a lot of fun you can have with organizing. Even though it's not as sexy, it's fun to know how to do it, because when you can organize and get around Capture One's workflow, then everything else just falls into place, right? I think that's ultimately the goal. Is, you know, it can be intimidating, but when you learn where all the tools are that you need, it becomes really easy to function. I mean, if you can't get around your program, then you can't really make adjustments, because that comes second to actually getting around the program. Speaking of getting around the program, let's talk about keyboard shortcuts, because with Capture One, like Photoshop, they love keyboard shortcuts. And if you know me, I love keyboard shortcuts because I'm lazy in the sense of having to move my hand around the keyboard and actually click on tools and options and menus. So let me show you where they are and some really interesting ones that quickly speed up your workflow. Now in Capture One, the keyboard shortcuts on the Mac version are located under Capture One and Edit Keyboard Shortcuts. On the PC, I'm not sure where it is, but it's probably under Edit Keyboard Shortcuts. Logically, I think it was there, or either under File or View. So find it, it's there. And when you do, go to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts. Now here is where the engine is. Here we can get under the hood and play with ways to tamper. First thing, instead of default, because we're not amateurs, we're professionals, we're gonna click Create. And we're gonna create RGG, Keyboard Shortcuts, and hit OK. So these little dialogues relate to the top menu options here. The interesting thing is, for me personally, there's a few keyboard shortcuts that I would use regularly. And now I've cleared all of them, but there's a few that I think you should know about. The first one is going to be change the keyboard shortcuts for your color tags, that you can quickly go from red to green with just one click of a button. And that makes it really easy for me as well. And that is going to be under Adjustments. And next we have Color Tag. So we can go ahead and over here, the red will change, we'll just keep it, let's see, click X, click minus, I'm going to use minus for mine. No shift, just the minus key. And then for green, I'll click X to clear it, and I'll hit equals, which is next to the delete button if you're on a US keyboard. Now I know that every single keyboard in the world is different depending on the country you're from. So if you have a keyboard that has different symbols and signs, you can use that as your option. So figure out where it's most comfortable for you, and don't freak out, because in case you mess something up, you can easily go back and click on defaults, which allow you to go back to default settings and just create a new one. So don't worry, there's a lot of room to play around, okay? That's what I learned. I remember changing my keyboard shortcut to like 0, but 0 was clearing all the stars. And I totally, freaked out a little bit and just went back to default and just started again. So it's no problem. I use my equal sign because it's next to my minus. So minus goes red, equals goes green. Makes it really easy for me. And I keep that pretty much permanent in case I'm going and flagging things. The next is if you ever need to know any keyboard shortcuts, it's all listed for you. So your ratings are here as well. You can see 0 through 5 is my star ratings. I keep that. So that means you can use 6 through 9 for other things as well, which is pretty cool. We will compress that. Next, let's talk about the tools. This is a precursor to what we're going to get into, but it's nice to know now, because if you want to quickly shift between a few tabs, it allows you to do so. Now under View, you'll see something called Tool Tabs, or Select Tool Tab. So let me expand that. What Tool Tab is on the left-hand side, you have all these little icons. I've briefly mentioned that this one's color related, this one's exposure related. Just like Lightroom, where over here on the develop module, you have, exposure related here, and then at the bottom you have color related. So in Lightroom, it's all stacked on top of one another vertically, but in Capture One, it's horizontal because it's sectioned off to give you more space for what you're working with. So I think it's more efficient use of space just on how it's laid out. It's really intelligent. In a way, it makes a lot more sense when you think about it this way. So you have all your tool options here, which we're going to get into, trust me. But it just goes to show you the difference in how they're laid out. And then you have other ones here as well. So we'll go under Capture One again, edit keyboard shortcuts. Now with the RGG shortcuts that we've made. So here it says previous and next. What this means is that if I use these shortcuts, let me quickly close this. For Mac, it's Option Command and the arrow keys. So if I do that, Option Command right arrow key, you notice that it goes from right to left. I am primarily on these three tool tabs, which is going to be my color, exposure and color, and then my library. So it quickly allows me to go back and forth by using those commands. So I can go in and do Capture One, edit keyboard shortcuts, and instead of using those three keys, let's see if we can maybe change it to something else. Like we can say 7 and 8. And Tool Tab 1 represents the first one. So let's say this one is going to be 9. So there, so I can do 7, 8. 7 and 8 are going back and forth. So they're like my arrows. So I don't have to hit two keys. And then 9 goes to home base, which is my library. I thought this makes life really easy. And in vice versa, if you decide that you quickly want to change how this looks, where instead of seeing the thumbnails all the time, I just hit Command B. I don't change that shortcut because it's really easy for me to hit Command B. And again, Command B was, what was it? Show browser and hide browser. So that just hides my thumbnails in case I want a bigger, much more real estate on that aspect. I know on a Mac side, there's also a few other ones. Like there's browser auto mode. What browser auto mode is it will automatically hide it if I'm not hovering over it. So, you get the best of both worlds without any shortcuts. And the same thing goes for some of the tools. Let's see here. So there's tool auto mode as well. So in case I know what I want to do, but don't want to show it all the time, I can do that as well. Okay? So again, let's go through quickly and look at some of the other keyboard shortcut options we have. One other one that I found really useful for me is the delete one. So under edit and delete, you can put that to anything you want. So if you're often deleting images from the catalog, you can quickly just delete that as well, which is not a huge problem. So you can name that to what you want. And in case you want to undo things or redo things, Command or Shift Command Z, very similar to Photoshop. If you're used to that, then that's very similar. There's a lot of view options that we talked about, the tools and everything else. The rest of this we're still going to cover under our icons on the top, so I'm not going to go into that into huge detail. Under adjustment, you have things like rotating, so you can rotate left or right, but we don't really do much of that. Copy adjustments and apply adjustments, they're shortcut icons for that, so you don't have to change it. And we're going to get into that when we do color adjustments and things. We can copy and paste it into other images. Here we have ratings, color tags. Under image, we'll talk about these as well. and so forth. So everything else is very user-friendly. Zooming in, I just hold Z and just click, or Z option and click, or Command plus and Command minus, and or fit or fill. And those shortcuts are identical to Photoshop. So if you're ever unfamiliar, just reference your Photoshop knowledge and the common sense will just filter through. Next, we have things like live view in case you optimize that. And that's pretty much it. Now, we have things like exposure and white balance. So in case you have, you adjust exposure quite often or your white balance quite often, you can change it over here. It shows you what these shortcuts are. So you can either get used to them or change it to whatever you feel like using the most. Maybe you can change it to a letter. Maybe white balance can be like O and P. Maybe exposure can be the letters under that, very similar to Photoshop. Maybe I can change my exposure to, let's see, Q. So let's say increased exposure will be W or Q, and decreased exposure can be something else. So you see that one of the differences is if the key is already assigned to a pre-programmed key, then you have to change that accordingly. But this gives you different options on what to do in case you want to play around with keyboard shortcuts. And that's it. The rest of this is all the tools that we're going to go over next, but here's where you find the shortcuts for that. Now that we talked about our keyboard shortcuts in Capture One, let's talk about some of our toolbars that Capture One has to offer for navigation and adjusting our image.